This episode of the Lutheran Cartographer is sponsored by Ad Crucem. Get wonderful gifts, Christmas ornaments, art, and cards at adcrucem.com or go to lutherancartographer.com/2020gifts to be taken to their site. The Lutheran Cartographer, Episode 51. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer, the podcast where we explore what it's like to be Lutheran in different places. I'm your host, Nicholas Weber. Today we are going to Iowa to a two-point parish, St. Paul's and St. Paul Lutheran Church in Buckeye, Iowa, and Alden, Iowa, where Pastor Bill Traphagan is the pastor there. Pastor Traphagan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So help orient our listeners geographically. Most know where Iowa is, but where exactly in Iowa are we?
We're almost dead center geographically. Story City is the geographic center, and we're just northeast of there, a few miles. If you know Iowa, Ames, we are. If you come up 28 miles, we're just a few minutes to the east of that. Buckeye is to the south of Highway 20, and Alden is just to the north of it. If you're less familiar with Iowa and you only know Des Moines, we're about an hour north of that, up 35, and then we're 2.5 hours south of Minneapolis.
All right, good deal. So tell us about yourself. What's your background? Where have you lived before?
I was born and raised in McCook, Nebraska. I was a cradle Lutheran, and after my upbringing there, I went and did my undergrad in Seward, Nebraska at Concordia, with the great encouragement of my pastor and my pastor's wife. It probably was not my first choice. Somehow, some way, I ended up there. And then I finally went to the seminary after that in Fort Wayne. After I learned a few things there, then I was sent to the great state of North Dakota. Some people think that Iowa is rural, and that's probably true. North Dakota, there are parts of it that are really not even rural; they're just isolated, and that's where we were in central North Dakota. It wasn't really that bad. We really got used to it and learned a few things. But the idea of having to drive over an hour to Walmart to shop for groceries, even for someone who grew up in western Nebraska, that was a little bit different than what I was used to, and that was fine. We learned how to freeze milk in our freezer and all sorts of other things, and we got along just fine. And after a short time there, I took a call to eastern Iowa to serve Bennett and Stanwood. And then this last March, we moved to our current location in Alden. And I also serve the church in Buckeye, just south of here.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I think the smallest town I've ever been in was Zoll, North Dakota, which was a population of 7 people. Yeah, North Dakota, you can get some small towns there. So tell us a little bit more. How would you compare where you are now in Buckeye and Alden with these other places? Is there a big contrast there, or would you say that it's mostly the same sort of rural atmosphere?
I've really only lived in a city while I was in Fort Wayne, and then on Vicarage when I was in Terre Haute, Indiana. Those places certainly have their own charm for cities, but all of the other places that we have lived, all of the towns and the churches that I've served, they've all been rural, small towns where the Lutheran Church is maybe not big by anyone's standards, but it is fairly prominent in town, just because it's one of the only things in town. And so where we are now, I think is pretty similar. Farmers are farmers pretty much wherever you go. There are, of course, some differences. I think here locally, the Lutherans that I interact with the most, you have the farmers, but there's also a number of people, I think more so here, that own their own business than some of the other places that I have been. This is also probably the two of the larger congregations of the rural congregations that I've served, and they're not huge by any means, but they are a little bit larger. You've got your typical benefits of small town living, where everybody knows everybody, for better or worse. You also have there is this idea, well, we're the small town, we're not like, in North Dakota, it was like, well, we're not Bismarck, because that was the closest big town. And here, Alden doesn't suffer from it too much, but it's like, well, we're not Iowa Falls, and Iowa Falls has all of 5,000 people in it, and we only have 750 in Alden. But there is something to it, I think, that we've kind of we just kind of assume that our children have to get up and move, and that's very typical of small towns. But I've actually found that there are actually a lot of jobs here, which kind of surprised me. I mean, I knew that there were some. Obviously, people live here and they support their families, but there is more here than what I thought I would find. Large and by, these small communities are much like the other small communities I've been a part of, and that kind of makes it feel like home. Because outside of talking about football, I understand you had a Pastor Poppy on a few weeks ago, and he got to talk to you about the state of Husker football and its idolatry. But outside of that, we really get along just fine here in Iowa, and it seems very much like home. A lot of the same tendencies.
I see. So tell us a little bit more about one of the things you mentioned, and that is the idea of in a small town, people know your comings and goings. How do you start to navigate that? And for many of our listeners who come from a urban or suburban background, that's very unfamiliar to them. Say more about that.
Well, I think you can look at it, I guess, positively or negatively. If you're a person that really loves your privacy, and if somebody does see you doing something, they don't know who you are, and so they can't report your name to their friends or whatever, then small town life, probably, whether it's here or someplace else, is probably going to be difficult. If you're going to try to attempt that, I would really encourage you to rent or purchase a home in the country where you have fewer neighbors than what you do in town. But in town, it's really great. I know everybody on my block by first name, and they know me. We know each other's kids' names. If something is, if we see something that's going wrong, or something that might be an important life lesson, we're able to share that. We know where everybody works, and that's very comfortable and I think very helpful. And it's also nice being able to know the families. If their kids come over to my backyard and play, I know who their family is, and I know kind of what home they're being raised in. Whereas if I lived in a city, I might not know my neighbors very well. I might know one or two of my neighbors, but I'm probably not going to know everybody down the street because I get in my car and I drive away. Whereas here we walk down the block all the time. My kids love walking down to the library. They love walking to the post office, and we get to say hi to the people as we go. And we've only been here a short time, but the longer that you're in a small town, the more that everybody gets to know you, and you get to develop those relationships. And those might seem like a small thing, but I think that those are very valuable, even if we don't spend a lot of time together. I think it's very comforting to know the people that live in your town. And if push comes to shove and you need something or there's a problem, we had the derecho come through and it was mostly south of us. But to see these small towns where everybody knew everybody come together, and if there was a widow or an old woman somewhere who didn't have anybody to help take care of her, that was one of the first places people went, because they said, hey, we got to check on her and make sure she's okay. That's not going to happen if you don't know your neighbors.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's go on and talk a little bit more about the best things about Buckeye and Alden.
I think there's a lot to like about this area. The first thing that I really like is Bennett and Alden were not kind of isolated as a church or as communities. There's a number of other good, faithful Lutheran churches with good, faithful Lutheran pastors in our area. There's actually 5 other congregations that we can get to within 30 minutes. And so that kind of close proximity is very good. Missouri Synod, we probably have more churches than most other denominations do in this area. And that makes it very nice that even if they don't go to our church, we know a lot of the other Lutherans in the area, and we're able to kind of help and support each other. And we look forward after COVID, especially, to being able to join in with some of the events. But with Buckeye and Alden, each of these towns, Buckeye is very small, only has about 100 people, Alden about 750. And so there's not a ton going on in Buckeye, but the people there are very warm and sweet and gentle, and they know everybody in town. There aren't any strangers there, and that's very good. Alden is much the same way, but obviously a little bigger. There are a number of businesses around town, And it is nice to be able to walk into some place and they cut your hair and you know who they are. Or you go down to the restaurant and you're like, hey, there's my neighbor across the street, or hey, I know where my waitress lives. And there is a certain charm, and maybe it's not the same thing as having dinner in your home, but it almost is in some ways when you get to know the people. And we look forward to that. Then you've got Iowa Falls right there with 5,000 people. There's 3 grocery stores there. You've got Walmart, Hy-Vee, and Fairway, and so it's not a huge city or anything, but I can be anywhere in Iowa Falls in 10 minutes from Alden, and so I get all of the benefits of living in the much smaller community and knowing all of my neighbors really well. But then it's kind of like living in a city. In 10 minutes I can be anywhere and have anything that I need, and we really enjoy that.
Yeah, definitely by rural standards, that sounds like a big, not a big city, but certainly a city with lots of amenities.
Yeah, and we're kind of situated. Ames is 40 minutes south west of us. Mason City is an hour north. Des Moines is an hour south. Waterloo is an hour to the east. And so Iowa Falls is kind of in the middle, and so it's kind of that town that has to have a little bit more commerce in it, because you're not going to get in the car and drive an hour for everything you need. And so it has a little bit more, and it kind of draws from the population around us. And so there is a little bit more going on in that town of 5,000 people than a lot of other towns of 5,000 that I've been around.
Let's go on and talk about what the most challenging things about living in that area are.
I guess having been part of so many small towns and having grown up with it, I don't really find it all that challenging. I think there's a lot of things here that are really good, including the proximity to stuff. When we moved here, we're like, well, yeah, there's Iowa Falls, but it's going to be like other places we've lived where you can go and shop there, but it's going to be significantly more expensive, and you're not going to want to drive 40 minutes to Ames, but you're going to want to because you want to be able to pay your bills and take care of your family, and you don't want to, um, pay that much more for groceries. So we moved here. We're like, well, yeah, we need to really limit our trips to Ames to like once a week or something to be able to get groceries, and then kind of be able to get by. But the longer that we've lived here, the fewer trips to Ames that we make, and now we just don't go to Ames hardly ever. And if we do, it's really more of a social visit than it is out of necessity. Whereas other places, when we were in North Dakota, we drove to Bismarck because we couldn't afford to shop at the little small town grocery store. I walked in right before I was ordained, and it's like, well, maybe we won't shop here often, but if we get in a pinch or we forgot something or you run out of something, we'll shop here. And I just went back to see how much milk was, and it was $6.50 a gallon. And I was like, I don't, just like, we're either just not going to drink milk, or we're going to drive to Bismarck. And that's just the way it was. Whereas here, I really feel like we have almost everything we need at our fingertips, and anything beyond that, it's probably not something that has to be purchased today. It's if it's something that you're working on at home, it's probably something that you've planned to do. And I've been really impressed. And we try to live fairly simply too, but being able to zip over and to get a cup of coffee over in Iowa Falls, and you can get one here at the cafe too. That's very enjoyable. Whereas we've lived places where the gas station was as good as it was going to get. And when we were in North Dakota, we'd go there, and we actually really learned to love it. But it was just like, the best pizza for miles around was out of a gas station, and it was quite good, and we were very happy to have that. But that's not what most people are used to.
Yeah, certainly. So say a little bit more about the weather in Iowa for those that haven't experienced an Iowa summer or winter.
Yeah, well, we have 4 seasons. The winters, I don't find that they are particularly bad, but I grew up in Southwest Nebraska, and so I was used to winter. It got cold. I remember when I was little, I used to have to, several times a year, I'd go out and help my dad shovel snow. And when we lived in town, for a few years. I was very, very small. We moved out to the country when I was 5, but I remember following along my dad with a little tiny plastic shovel, and those are really wonderful memories. But we don't seem to get a bunch of big snows like we did back then. It seemed like then it just seemed like, from what I remember, it seemed like every 3 weeks we'd get another 4 foot of snow. We'd be out there out there shoveling, and then after the wind blew, we'd have to go shovel it again. And certainly there are times that we have that, but that's not like an every month sort of experience. We spent 4 winters now here in Iowa, and they were in eastern Iowa, but they were not particularly bad. I mean, we get snow, but I don't remember a time in, say, the last 20 years where we have winters like what I remember as a little kid, where I remember that, like, we couldn't go outside for recess at school because the high for 3 weeks was -4. We just don't have that. And we've had a couple of harsher winters here and there, but nothing like what I remember. And so I haven't spent a winter here in this part of Iowa, but I suspect that it's not going to be a lot different. But the time to really be here is in the late spring and summer and early fall. That's when there's a lot of the, I guess, a lot of the outdoorsy activity here. Certainly, there are people that they have their snowmobiles and they have a great time doing that. But I really enjoy the summer here. There are so many parks and waterways around here. It's really, really impressive. Hardin County has, I think, like 60 parks and like 4,000 acres that the Conservation Board manages, and they do a really fantastic job. And there's tons of places to go camping. And so if you don't like one park because it doesn't have this or it doesn't have that, or it's not arranged the way that you would like it, you're not going to have to go very far to find something else.
That makes sense. Let's take a moment for a word from our sponsor. Advent is already here and Christmas will come shortly thereafter. Ad Crucem wants to help you get ready this season with their wonderful collection of gifts, art, greeting cards, and Christmas ornaments. These things are great. They recently sent me some of their Christmas ornaments. They're pewter. They have a nice weight to them with striking designs on the front. They'll make a great gift for a loved one or a beautiful adornment for your own tree. They have a bunch of different designs. I gave one of their baptism ornaments as a gift recently, and I was proud and happy to do so. Ad Crucem also sells greeting cards and Christmas cards, one of my favorite of their offerings. They have just the right art on the front to punctuate the message, which is always robustly Lutheran. No saccharine, overly sweet bromides here. You'll find just the right message for every occasion. Check out their wonderful things at adcrucem.com. That's ADCRUCEM.com, or go to lutherancartographer.com/2020gifts to be redirected to their website. Check them out. Let's get back to our guest. Let's go on and talk about what it's like to be Lutheran where you are. A lot of people think of the Midwest, and especially Iowa, Minnesota, as like a very Lutheran place. Is that the case? What's it like to be Lutheran there?
It depends on what part of Iowa you're in. I'm fairly familiar with eastern Iowa, not as familiar with this part of Iowa, but I've been really impressed. This circuit and the pastors and the congregations. There's not the wide-ranging variance that you might find in terms of worship practices from congregation to congregation. You don't have female lectors, you don't have open communion, you don't have any of those sorts of things. You have, from top to bottom, you have really good preaching, which is important. And the other thing is I would say that here the Lutherans are more densely populated than they are in some other parts of Iowa. My last circuit, it was an hour end to end. I could get to other congregations, probably 3 or 4 within a half an hour. But here, like I say, I can get to any church in my circuit in half an hour. And so, like, if I take a vacation and we stay home, and if we want to, or if it's during the week and they have a festival during the week. We were up to Latimer for Reformation Day because we didn't hold service on the day here, and it's just like, hey, we can run up there. It's 30 minutes and it's 30 minutes back. It's not a big deal, even on a Saturday night, and I can get back and I'm not groggy for church the next morning. That's very good. So I think in terms of being a Missouri Synod Lutheran, I think it's probably easier here than it is in some other places. All of our churches are suffering from the same demographic decline that all of our churches are, and for all the same reasons. Outside of the Missouri Synod, as you move south out of this area, you do tend to get into more pietistic areas, and that's reflected in some of the other Lutheran churches that are represented there. We would probably classify them as conservative Lutheran churches, like there's a Free Lutheran Church. The ELCA is not heavily represented in this area. I know there's one half an hour south of us, and there's one over in Iowa Falls, but it's not like some places where you go to every town and it seems like there's an ELCA church. And then like the Missouri Synod is, more lightly represented in every other town or something like that. And so the Missouri Synod has a pretty good imprint in this community, and it looks that even 30 years from now, if some congregations have had to combine or whatnot, that it does appear that we'll continue to be well represented in this area, and that makes things a little bit easier. And it's nice, if someone was to pick up and move here or to move someplace else, one of the things that I would, if I was doing that as a father, I'd be like, well, if I move my family there, what happens if this congregation gets smaller over the next 10 years and cannot stay open? Am I going to have to drive an hour or an hour and a half to go to church, or are we going to have to move again? Well, here you've got so many congregations, and they're all faithful. The pastors are on the same page theologically, but that makes that very easy. I think that's not a concern I would have moving here. Whereas there are some other places that I've lived that, if that one parish goes under, all of a sudden now you have a real problem on your hands, just in terms of being able to participate fully in the liturgical life of the congregation.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting thing that we haven't talked about before, of thinking more long term of like, what happens when I move here and 10 years from now, is this church still here? That's a good way of thinking about it. All right, let's go on and talk kind of in the same vein, what it's like to raise a family there.
You've got the typical small town things. There's a lot of pride in our churches and in our community, and that makes it's pretty predictable that way. These communities tend to be more conservative than what the national average is, but there's certainly a wide spectrum, and that I think that someone would find people to their liking that they would be able to visit with that would have similar views, regardless of where they are kind of on the political spectrum. The Lutheran churches in this area, like I said, are very faithful. In terms of raising a family, I think one of them, besides your church, which is first and foremost, you really have to think kind of about the big ticket items. It's just like, well, where am I going to work, and what kind of work is there? Am I going to be able to support my family? What sort of education is available, and things like that. Like I said, there's a lot more jobs here than what I would have probably imagined. Higher speed internet is being implemented even as we speak, and that will help existing industry and all of the jobs related to agriculture in the area. But also, if someone wants to telecommute, if they have an employer that can do that, and will let them, we're gonna have people that live in central Iowa and go to a Lutheran church, but they might work for some company in North Carolina or Florida, if their job allows it, or maybe they only have to fly out to be there very infrequently, a couple times a year, and that's certainly doable. In terms of, I guess, someone whose expertise and career goals don't fit within that small town or ag-related things, Ames is not far. Like I say, it's 40 minutes. There are people that commute there. There are people that commute over to Waterloo, which is about an hour. Des Moines, If you can't find a job in Des Moines right now, it's because you're not trying. And it's growing, and especially north of Des Moines. And so jobs are actually kind of growing closer to us as well. Des Moines is really growing towards the north, towards us, towards Ames. And that will certainly help. One of the reasons that people would choose to live in a smaller town like Alden or Buckeye is that the cost of living here is much cheaper than what it is even in a place like Ames or Waterloo. And I think that those are very affordable as far as cities go. The cost of living is significantly cheaper here. But even from like Iowa Falls to Alden, the housing is significantly cheaper in Alden. So Alden is kind of a bedroom community for Iowa Falls in some ways. But we certainly do have people that commute, and there are plenty of jobs around. Anybody who is kind of wondering about that, I just say, hey, just take a look around. If there's something you're looking for and you're thinking about moving here, come in and visit. I'll help you look. I've done that. So that kind of takes care of the job thing. In terms of and kind of cost of living, in terms of education, I don't think that we are unique in this, but I do think that our education opportunities here are quite good. In terms of the public schools, the things that Lutherans especially are concerned about is, well, what are they going to teach about human sexuality? What are they going to teach about evolution? Are they going to be completely hostile to any sort of Christian worldview? Here in town, we have at the public school, there are a number of our members that actually teach at the school. And so if I sent my kids to the public school, they would have some of my members at least some of the time. And that would be very good. And it's that way in other areas as well, as you kind of branch out from Alden and Buckeye. Besides that, you do have a Lutheran school up in Latimer that goes up through the 8th grade. Some Lutheran schools are better than others. I think that it's actually very good. The teachers there are Lutheran. The pastor there is teaching every day of the week and helps form and shape the religious instruction there. And it's very affordable. Sometimes Lutheran education in some places is quite expensive. There it's actually quite affordable, I think, without financial aid. With financial aid, you can pay very, very little and send your kids and have a very good quality Lutheran education. If not for my other preferences, I'd be happy to send my kids there. And my wife and I, we're still going to go and tour there kind of once some of the COVID stuff settles down. But we've chosen to homeschool our family. And we started doing that just within the last couple of years as our oldest gets into that. Not every day is super easy, but there is a lot of joy in it. It really is fun being able to come home from work and being able to ask your children what they learned in school. And if they give me a blank stare like, well, we didn't learn anything, I can say, well, what did you guys actually talk about today? And I actually know. There's a lot of joy. We're also able to pray more as a family, and we can have, if we want to have daily matins, we can have daily matins. If there's something going on with our family or with the church that we need to maintain a little bit of flexibility, we're able to do that, and that's very good. One of the other things about homeschooling in this area is I would say that the pastors in our district, on the whole, you're going to probably find more of them homeschooling than what you would in some other areas. And that's not because we don't think that our Lutheran schools are good or want to try to say something about the public schools. It's just that we believe the best people to teach our children is us, and that we're given that authority in the fourth commandment, and we take pride and joy in doing that. We also realize that not everybody wants to homeschool or can homeschool, and so I think what we do is we try to say that if you're a father and a mother, that it's your job to see to the education of your children and to make sure that they're taught the Word of God. And if you think that the public school is the best place for that and that works the best for your family, then do that. And if you think that you want to drive 20 minutes from Alden up to Latimer and take your kids to school there, then great, and you'll have our full support in doing something like that. And if you want to try your hand at homeschooling, or you're unsure about it, or you want to know more about it, well, you can go and talk to most of the pastors in our district, and they probably know something about it, or have done it themselves, or have a close friend that has. I think that's fair and honest and good, and because of that, we're able to support those that choose to homeschool. One of my members is actually in one of the school districts nearby. She's actually the kind of the homeschool liaison, and so if somebody does choose to homeschool their kids, but they want to still have some kind of relationship with the public school and just kind of make sure that they're not missing anything. She's going to be one of the people you'll be working with, and that's very good. We would prefer to have a homeschool group if we were going to have one that is made up of confessional Lutherans like us, and I don't think that we're terribly far from being able to kind of pull something like that together, because it doesn't really take a lot of families. In my last parish, there was 2 pastors, and we each had one family in our congregation that homeschooled, and our families got together 1 day a week. That was something that made it actually hard to leave, because we figured, well, maybe something like that could develop, but it's not something that we could just step into. And but there have been other blessings since we moved here.
Yeah, that's really good. Let's go ahead and go on and talk about one thing that's on many people's minds right now, and that is COVID. If you were to place Iowa on a spectrum, and let's say California and New York were on one end in terms of their response, and like South Dakota and Florida were on the other end, where would you place Iowa?
I guess in terms of government orders and regulations, I wouldn't put us too far from South Dakota. Our governor, I think, has been trying to be really realistic and fair and realize that anything that she issues from her desk, even with all of the qualifications that she might make, are going to impact families and communities and churches a great deal. And she'd be painting with a very broad brush, and she can't possibly anticipate everything. I think that she realizes that a lot of Iowans, especially in rural areas, that we have our own businesses, we have our own farms, and if we interact with people, we probably need to. And she also realizes, I think, that we're grown adults, and I don't think anybody has been living under a rock. I don't think that they don't know about COVID. I don't think that they don't know about what the social distancing and masking benefits are. You can look that up, and if you think that that's important to you and your family, then you can do that. But I think it really is that she just thinks that Iowans need to have the freedom to make their own personal choices. And she also knows that we're going to bear responsibility for those choices. I think that's one of the things that's kind of been missing from the national conversation, is that if someone makes the choice for us, we're never going to get to a point where we actually know how to respond to this pandemic or some other one. That's a hard thing. Here, I think, for the most part, people are pretty favorable towards that. Some people, of course, wish the governor would do more. I've heard a few people that wish that the governor would just stay out of our business and leave us alone. And that's the hard thing, I think, about being a governor right now, or being the pastor of a congregation, or being the administrator at a school. You're having to make some choices for people that you really don't want to make. It's not something that I think anybody enjoys, being put in that position. And to a certain degree, whatever you decide was going to make somebody upset. Maybe a lot of people upset.
That's very true. All right, now let's go on and talk about more fun things. Talk about the things that you'd recommend if you had a friend coming into town. Things to do, places to eat.
Like I said before, there's a ton of parks, being able to fish, being able to go camping, and those sorts of things. Here in Alden, it's really nice. Iowa Falls is appropriately named, but Alden also has a small dam, and so the river that goes from here to Iowa Falls, there are people that I think are in their kayaks every day out there. So there's a lot of outdoorsy type stuff. Also, right here by Alden, we have something called the Calkins Nature Area, and there's a small museum there. We have not been to it yet because of some of the COVID stuff, but there are a number of trails out there. I can leave my house and I can be out of my car and hiking in 5 minutes out through the woods. It's not super long trails or anything like that, but you can get a couple miles in. It's really nice because you can go there and you don't have to spend the whole day there, and there's not a lot of travel time, and so that's very convenient for us. And I suspect that in the coming year, as our children get older, we'll spend even more time out there. In terms of other stuff around here, in terms of eating, if you want kind of some of the nicer things, of course, Ames is where to go. My personal favorite in Ames is Hickory Park. It's a wonderful barbecue place that even though it's across the district border, it is well known by the pastors in Iowa East, with even if you get an hour or an hour and a half from Ames. It came highly recommended and has not disappointed. They have a very long dessert menu with all sorts of ice cream and shakes and malts. pretty much every time we go to Ames, if we have time, that's one of the stops we make at least for dessert. Then more locally, here in Alden, we do have a couple of restaurants. One of them is called West Side. They basically have a made from scratch breakfast on the weekends, and that's pretty popular around town. I actually prefer going on Thursday nights to their pasta night. It's very affordable because it's kind of their special. They make everything from scratch and do a little better than what you would expect normally would be able to be done in a small town, just because they don't have the volume of customers. Then a few nights a week, there's also a place that has homemade pizza, and we enjoy that on occasion as well.
Fantastic. All right, so now as we start to close out the podcast, I want to make sure to give you the opportunity to point our listeners where you'd like, your church's website, places to follow you online. Where would you like to point our listeners?
We have a Facebook page, which is where most of our stuff goes to. It's where we live stream our services and all of that fun stuff, and also have a few congregational announcements. You can search for St. Paul's, Alden, and Buckeye, and you can find us. If you have any trouble finding that, please let Nicholas know, and he can get in touch with me, and I can get you connected that way. But we'd be happy to see you if you ever have opportunity to visit out here, whether you're our gracious host on the podcast or somebody listening in. We're always up to have company out here, and it does break up kind of our ordinary routines. We're pretty self-sufficient here, and the people of the congregation are really wonderful, and you'd love to meet them.
Fantastic. So listeners, make your plans to visit Buckeye and Alden. Pastor Traphagan, thank you so much for your time today. What are your parting thoughts for our listeners?
If you're listening to this podcast, I think sometimes that's because you're thinking about, well, where would I like to live someday, or where would we like to visit, or what should my Lutheran church be thinking about? The current day is very evil. We can we feel anxiety because of the COVID, as it wreaks havoc on our churches, and we also see kind of how the culture is becoming more hostile to us. The fact that we have lived a relatively comfortable time up until now is actually kind of an outlier within church history. The church has actually suffered more throughout history than it has enjoyed very secure and peaceful times. So we have perhaps some learning to do there. But that happens. The cross, as we bear it, it produces righteousness in us. It produces a stronger faith. It refines us, and that's very good for us. And I would just say, don't be afraid to suffer those things, and don't be afraid to embrace it and to remain firm and steadfast, as St. Paul encourages us over and over. When you read through his epistles, he's constantly saying, stand firm, because our first inclination, because of our flesh, is to kind of take a step back and try to kind of protect ourselves. St. Paul kind of urges us to take our stand on the public square, and certainly don't be rude or unloving, but to declare the mercy and the truth of God, and he will surely bless it.
Absolutely. Thank you again. God's peace.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. If you are interested in going to the church's website or checking out any of the sites that Pastor Traphagan recommended, check out the show notes page at lutherancartographer.com/51. You'll also find there a link to Ad Crucem. Remember, they want to help you get ready for Christmas with their great collection of Christmas ornaments, gifts, cards, all sorts of great stuff, robustly Lutheran. It's just fantastic. Check it out, adcrucem.com, or go to lutherancartographer.com/2020gifts to be redirected to their site. If you're not already, be sure you're subscribed to the show on iTunes or on Stitcher so that you don't miss an episode. While you're there, I would appreciate it if you would leave me a rating and a review so that more people will be able to listen to the show. Thanks again for listening. I'm Nicholas Weber. I'll talk to you soon.